This hangout on air is live. I just unstuck myself from my curtains. James was giving me a lot of hype going across it. I'd like to say boy alert, and I'd like to say welcome, hello. How are you all doing, people? Jimmy Boy, how are you doing, sir?
Very, very well. Last time the stream ended because Satan actually decided to cut the power to my entire building. However, I've now got a nice cup of yak's blood, which should sort of keep him quelled, keep him at bay. So I'm doing very well.
Yeah, we got by the deep state people. So that was the tragedy of that one. We were halfway through. We were just getting into a very, very interesting topic, which is the temple in Jerusalem, which is it was so fascinating. We got cut off there by the deep state at that point, because this is this is probably one of the biggest political cruxes and historical cruxes and religious cruxes. This temple that we're about to talk about, everything goes down there. And I think it's a brilliant place. It actually is a brilliant place to start off a new podcast. So it seems like Satan was on our side. All that nutting we've been doing over the past 20 minutes has definitely been rewarded. He liked that. So he gave us like a good setup here, because I'm trying to assert this idea that, and Jung says it quite a lot, that there's rules to psychology, there's a law to psychology, there's an up and down to psychology, there's a way things work, there's a logic essentially. So if you, like Jung always talks about opposites, if you become super arrogant, you'll have to get humbled. If you're too humble and insecure, you'll have to develop a counterbalancing force which is arrogant of some sort. One archetype, and I credit myself as having discovered this, but obviously I didn't. It was always there, and I just articulated it in my own way of saying it from like doing dream reading and whatnot, is this archetype of the kingdom. I feel that we all suffer, and we need to have a justified reason to fight through the pain, and that justified reason almost always manifests as a kingdom that we're fighting for. People die for their nations. People die for big political projects. And even when you get religious level, people die for the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God means something. Jesus always says the kingdom of God is within, is the thing that will save you from suffering. It's that type of idea. So what it is, that powerful psychological archetype. And what's so fascinating about this is that if you have that meaningful thing that will save you from suffering, you'll be willing to die for it. And what's so specific about Judaism is that Judaism is defined as a religion that lost this archetype. They're a very unstable religion for that reason. During Christ's time, the reason why Jesus got killed is because he showed up and he said, I'm the actual real deal here, people. I'm the Messiah. I'm the boyo. And the Messiah, the idea behind the Messiah is that he was going to come and he was going to establish the kingdom of the Jews. That's what he was going to come in. And Jesus shows up and he doesn't really, do any mad conquering and all that. And the Jews are like, fuck off. But more importantly, Jesus says that your temple is going to get destroyed. And that was considered essentially blasphemy. And then they started to really resent him because of that, because he started saying arrogant stuff like that. And he also started saying, I am the Messiah. I am I'm the Son of Man. They're like, what? You can't say that. And then Jesus said that'll be destroyed. And what happened after Jesus was killed, the temple did get destroyed really quickly after that. And Judaism had this huge problem. Like, it wasn't even a religion at that point. It was just a tribe. But then after that, they formulated this religion around this idea that they need to have that temple rebuilt. And Christianity is sort of encircled around the idea that the end times will come when this temple is rebuilt. So this is coded into the works of the Bible. Now, whatever way you want to read that, this is where we start getting into the realm of very interesting predictions. And this brings us to this idea of the Antichrist and the idea of the coming of the end times and all this stuff. And all of this is really relevant because you have a group of people, the Jews, who are like very powerful people who are highly motivated to get their temple rebuilt. That's the whole premise of their religion. The whole point of their religion is to get that temple rebuilt because it's the archetype of the kingdom. It is the thing that will save them from suffering. Israel was a whole kingdom that would save them from suffering. Until they got Israel, they would wander around lonely through Europe, and the Europeans would kick them out of their countries the whole time. And it was just they would wander around. They'd never feel at home. They had no home. They had no place. They had no grounding place. So they needed a place for it to come back, and that was Israel. And the most important part of that kingdom is the temple. And the Bible was almost like a document of maybe they saw in this document that they were like, the political game has to go this direction. The Jews will not stop until they get their temple rebuilt. And for some reason, our destinies are all intertwined around these things as well. Like, you could say, is this God in control of history? Like it's hard to know. But if you want to make the most basic basic assumption of possible, you can say that psychologically people need that kingdom to save them from suffering. And all you need to do is see which idea people are putting on top of that archetype. So you will have people like, John Dee for the English. He came up with the idea of the British Empire, and that set them on that endeavor. So that was their archetype, their kingdom. The Irish, in order to get free from them filthy fucking Brits, specifically James, is that we said we wanted our own home nation. So that was our big thing. And then we had a civil war because we came to a decision. It's like, what type of kingdom will we build? And our civil war was dictated on, should we give the North to the Brits or should we keep the North for ourselves? And some people were like, do not compromise. But it's all wars over kingdom.
We won't even let you have the North. Don't pretend it's your choice. Come on.
We were like, how nice should we be to the English? Because that we could see them shaking in their boots across there. They were just like,
you can say whatever you want. I just laugh it off, little boy. Laugh it off.
He has me here, people. This is so ruthless. Like, I hope if the Antichrist comes, he gets James first. That's it. That's all I care. Antichrist, if you're watching this, just get him first. That's all that matters to me.
You're now making a bargain with the devil. Come on now, young man.
Fuck's sake. See, this is how it happens, people. This is how wars happen. Like, I remember this, man. I remember this. You're on that list of people. I don't know, the bad list.
Yeah, this is how wars happen. The alpha men versus the beta little Irish boys.
The fucker has me on this, man. He fucking has me on this. Anyway, I'm gonna go back and be a good boyo and stay on topic. You fucking abusive older brother. Dickhead. So yes, we're talking about that archetype. It's necessary. You can see that it's people, even with their they got lucky during the historical process. They're able to push you around with the size of their kingdoms, and it's something that's very, very, like, so yeah, as I was saying, all of our destinies seem to be intertwined because all of our political decisions are tied to this psychological decision. This psychological archetype is real. It's there. It changes the world, how this works. That's an insane premise when you think about it. It's like something that goes on in our heads will change history. But that's essentially what it's saying, is that it's inescapable. If you get a group of people, especially as powerful as the Jews, and they're like, we need our kingdom, there will be no escaping that psychological reality, because you'd have to literally destroy their souls. You'd have to like wipe out their ability to have that archetype. That's just impossible. So that causes a great challenge, because they're going to always push to go back to Israel, and they're always going to want to build that temple. That's what they want. And it's a very strange idea. Like, it's a weird idea with Christianity. Did Christianity liberate us from needing that archetype from the outside and allowed us to do it within? Like, that's an interesting idea, isn't it? Like, is that what that religion was doing? Whereas but and then, like, it's more pagan and ethnic to have a kingdom in the outside world. It's an interesting idea. Nonetheless, what seems to be the big premise, and I guess you could say the predictive power of these symbols, these archetypes, is that we are all getting pulled along by these mimetic struggles. They're all pulling us back to this place in the Middle East, and you'd think that it's not a big deal. Like, maybe after 1,500 years, you're like, oh, what does Jerusalem and Israel really mean? But for some reason, perhaps because it was coded into the books, our focus has been drawn back to there. And now I'm going to start screen sharing. And this is what I was just saying before they got us. It's happening, man. They got Israel in 1948, and then Trump there recently, there was talk of making, so there's the temple getting burned. Can you see that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the temple. That's the temple getting burned by the Romans. So after Jesus was killed, the Jews or the Pharisees or whoever was in Judea at the time pissed off the Romans. They started rebelling against them, and so the Romans came in and just destroyed everything. They just completely obliterated the entire state and turned it into Palestine. And so there's a really important thing to understand, is that our history, the Jewish history, is literally defined by this moment. This was a huge problem because they destroyed their temple and they made them a wandering people. And so the dynamic between the Jewish history is related around the idea of Rome and Judea. And they were like, the Romans destroyed us. Rome represents Europe. And now Christianity, our religion, was tied to this moment too. So this moment where this temple fell was the biggest moment in our history. It is the foundational premise for everything that has happened since, because the Bible then became, and then the Talmud separately became the two books that were based upon what this drama that happened here. So this is a very, very important time of history, and you can see it. All of our dates go back to this. Like this is AD 0, this is AD 70, you know, but like it's all related to that time. And then the Roman Empire fell after this, and so everything stays here, and it's a psychological trauma that stays here, and Christianity was rooted here, and it's almost like we're talking about Aions, man. This was very close to the transition from the Aion into the Aion Pisces. The Romans, this is so fucking crazy, man. I don't know how to get this my head around this, but the Romans were represented as I think it's Mars, and they also saw themselves as Aries, I believe it was. They saw themselves as the ram god, and that is, I believe that is the Aion that came before Pisces, became before the Jesus Aion. So like the big dominant Roman army was the one that ended off that last Aion of Aries, and that was the horned ram, and that's what we transitioned into with this. So our everything about our history is rooted here, and it seems like now we're coming to the closing end. Can you see that, Jimmy Boyo?
Oh, I can see it.
Yeah, like there's loads of news articles of this, but this is in some Israel press.
That's some goat sacrifice going on there.
I'm not too sure. Yeah, see, and this is it. They need a temple, and what they need to do in the temple is start doing sacrifices again, because they can't sacrifice without the temple. So there is this massive pull, and like they've got all their own unique set of symbols that we don't really understand. But you've got like red heifers. I've heard about this a few times. I don't really know what's going on, and they've got a whole layout for how the temple is supposed to be built. But yeah, there's this great sense that the third temple is closer than ever, and a lot of talk about Trump in the third temple. A lot of talk about that. Like Trump is very, very pro-Israel. He's going with it a lot, and like yeah, they're all talking about Trump going to be the guy who's going to build it for them. They're all into this. I can't really find any good stuff in this, I'm afraid. But yeah, there's one that people were saying. Yeah, Trump declares Jerusalem as like the recognized city or something. I'm not really too sure about the inner workings of the politics, but you see what I'm saying? There's something really big going on, and our focus is getting drawn back to this place. And this ties in with the end times speak of Christianity, pretty much. Like they say that this will be one big dramatic point. This is currently what I think sits in the place of the current temple, is the Dome of the Rock. This is a Muslim temple, and like they can't build a temple until they get rid of this thing. So that's going to cause a big problem, because this is like a extremely sacred artifact in the Islamic religion. So I don't know how that's going to go down, but as you can see, it's like, you might say it's completely irrational, but these things are massive symbols, and there will be conflict over the varying narratives and worldviews in order to establish who gets to place their symbol on this very specific holy place. And that will push us into conflict. That will seem like, would that be World War III like, or something like that? It's very hard to know. So there's a big tirade to bring us into this. James, any thoughts on that mad stuff?
Yeah, my first thought is, why did you have a picture of Aquinas open separately?
That's
sort of like one of your little pin-up boyos.
Yes, I told you I was dirty in the curtains, and I had to get some inspiration.
To Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a G. Apparently, 2 angels came down to protect him from the sodomy or something obscene that was going on. And they were like, "No, leave him be. He's a holy man." So I wouldn't be defiling Aquinas' name if I were you.
Okay, I wouldn't defile him, man. I was pure admiration.
Yeah. Okay.
Any?
I've got some ideas. So, it's very, when it comes to predictions, obviously it's very easy to go back in time and say this predicted the future, but to actually predict the future from where we are now is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Now, when it comes to the predictive power within Aion itself, it's not clear the specific time point at which things will change. So the main idea here is when Aions change. So it will be from Pisces. What's the next one? I always forget. This is Aquarius, the next one.
Aquarius, yeah.
Aquarius, yeah. So when it goes from that to the next one, then we'll have a massive shift. So, but it's not clear if it happened around the time of Aleister Crowley, about approximately around the 60s, or in the year 2600. And this is a really weird thing to me. Like, I've tried to research this an awful lot. Astronomers don't know when the Platonic months change. I don't know if that's because they can't, or if that's because they're incapable. because if you trace the star maps back, there is a star over Bethlehem, which blew my damn mind. We actually watched this in like a religious education class, and my teacher was an atheist. And when he brought, he was such a prick. But when he brought on this documentary, and it was like, yeah, astronomers have done it. There was actually a massive inexplicable star over Bethlehem at the time at which Jesus was born. It's 4 BC. He was like, coincidence. It's like, yeah, don't think so. Don't think so. So I don't know why they can't trace that forward. So I don't know, dude. I don't know when the third temple's coming, but it'd be interesting to see. Maybe Trump will be the one to do it. But the kingdom evolution idea is really, really fascinating. So like a kingdom is order, right? I can't think of anything else to describe it except for order. It's like the kingdom idea has changed over the course of Judaism and Christianity. I don't know what you'd call it before Christianity, Judeo-Christian, something like that. Whatever that the Abrahamic God idea. So it started off obviously in the Garden of Eden, which was perfect, and then we fell down when we learned about good and evil, and we became like gods. We fell down into this fallen world, and then God picked out Abraham and was like, you're a very good man. If you're a perfect man and you're willing to sacrifice literally everything, even this son that you've waited 100, I think it was 99 years for. Even if you're willing to sacrifice that, then I'll give you your damn kingdom, and it's specific to his seed. It's obviously the seed of Israel. So Judaism seems to be very focused on a physical kingdom in the Middle East, sitting in Israel. But then Christ, you're very right, he came along and was like, no, that's not the case. The kingdom of God is within you. So it does almost seem to be almost a conflict between psychology and the physical world. So you could say the world up here, the non-fallen world and the fallen world, which is a very interesting idea. So that's how the kingdom idea has evolved. And you bring this about through logos, obviously, because logos is God. Or logos was with God, logos is God, first line of John's gospel. And you can apply that in like 3 different ways. So it's like the kingdom of God within you. So your own personal kingdom. It's an archetype. It's like, how ordered is your life? And that's a very useful thing. We all resonate with that. We want our own kingdom. And then societal, obviously we build damn kingdoms. So society matches what's going on in our own heads. But then obviously when it comes to stuff like this, what about the metaphysical side of it? And I don't know. Maybe there is a metaphysical kingdom in the sky as well. But the first 2 seem to be good enough. So that kingdom idea is rooted deep within us. And as you pointed out beautifully, Stefan, it's the source of everything our culture stands for. And it all goes back to that idea. And you can never get away from it. That's one of the reasons why nationalism is on the rise, we'll say, and has always been around. It will never go away because the kingdom within you, kingdom around us, what does it mean? And it does seem to be that there is an assault. Maybe the main conflict right now in politics today is, shall we have a kingdom or shall we have no kingdom? Borders or shall we have no borders?
I would even disagree. I'd say it's about the nature of the kingdom, because an open borders is simply just an open borders kingdom. It's like you're just saying a world kingdom. Like the New World Order, as they often like.
Okay, yeah. So how far out should but then if the kingdom includes everything, no, okay, I'll side with you. I'll back down.
Nonetheless, like, it could be a ridiculous, irrational idea, but it doesn't have to be rational. Like my what I'm fronting here is that it's an archetype. Like when you sit down with your pain and you're like, why should I go and continue to suffer and strive for anything? What the fuck is the point? What direction am I going in? What am I going towards? And when you look at all religions, they all pull you towards a kingdom, and they always speak of a kingdom in the past. So they speak of an ideal state in the past. Like, it's so interesting that the word state is related to the idea of state of mind, state of being. It's like how you are. And then Jesus is like, kingdom of God is within. What's your mind state? And that's related to the idea of the state without. That's just fucking mind-blowing.
Yeah, kingdom within, kingdom outside. Absolutely.
It's so mind-blowing. Because a state is like a collection of people in the same wavelength, if you will. And so the question is, what type of state are we fighting for? George Soros is like, we need to kill all borders, and the state needs to be a world capitalist. Essentially what we have now, just even more liberal, if you know what I mean. And more going down that direction. So you see all the pillars of the kingdom: multiculturalism, diversity, capitalism. These things, they all roll into this. And then you look at Richard Spencer and Richard Spencer's fronts, and this is why people like this get attention, is because they hit the archetype and they hit it hard. Richard Spencer stands up and says, our state needs to have this pillar. This is the laws of this state. This is the God that lives over this state, and it's the God of white people. It'll be an ethno state based off white That's it, just white people, pretty much. And then you have Dugan, who's like Eurasia. You have Hitler. Hitler turned around and said the Reich. The Reich is the kingdom. It's the Holy Roman Empire, part 3, I believe he was saying. And that is a very, very specific, historically defined state, which is a collection of German people. And that state was ripped apart after World War I. And so, like, it's like you could have even said that it was, and I think a lot of people around this time easily could predict that World War II was going to happen. There was a few people who said this is not a peace deal, this is an armistice for 20 years or something like that. And like that's astounding, because 20 years later they kicked off in World War II, and that was pretty much because they saw that they carved Germany up, they carved the kingdom up, and the German people were going to sit there and feel that they needed that kingdom back. And then when a man came, a Messiah comes and articulates their need for the kingdom again, it says, I will give you the kingdom. They're like, we're behind you 100%, man. You do whatever you need to do to give us this. And he was like, I'm going to get rid of all the Jews. And they're like, whoa, well, yeah, fuck it. Like, give me the stake, give me the Reich, fuck it. Like, because they need it. It's an archetype. They need it, you know? And then Marx is the same. Marx sells off the idea of a utopia, which is a state that is perfect. And it is a sort of a delusion too. It's like, this will be a state where no one suffers. So it's a false state. Whereas Christ says, you know, it's like you conquer your suffering in here. Marx says, I will build a state for you that will conquer your suffering. So it's like this archetype. I see it everywhere, and it's predictive in its power. And I guess the biggest question is, how does this relate to the biblical story, which seems to be dominating our history? And people say stuff like God is in control of history, and you're like, oh, it's just some bullshit idea. But when you look at what's going on, it's like everything's getting pulled back there. It's almost impossible not to get sucked into this. Like, as much as we don't want to be tied to Israel's destiny, we're going back to that place no matter what. That's where the rubber hits the road. And if you look at all the Antichrist stories, the return stories, I'll give you Islam, for example. You'd imagine that the whole end of time dramas in Islam would happen around Mecca and Medina down there in Arabia, which is where their religion is based. No, what happens is the Dajjal, I think, comes out of Jerusalem and hangs out around Medina or Mecca or something like that. And then he goes back up to Jerusalem and he gets killed by Jesus. Like, Jesus is the savior in Islam as well. So it's very, very strange, this stuff.
Yeah, I've got multiple thoughts about this. So I think the kingdom of our current culture is the kingdom of John Lennon's Imagine. I never understood John Lennon, ever. First of all, he's a terrible musician. I don't care what anybody says. His songs are not good. Like, Imagine is not a good song. But it's like, imagine there's no countries. It's da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then imagine there's no heaven. Imagine there's no hell. Imagine there's no happiness in that. Probably no families. We're probably all going to be in a massive orgy together. Then that can be like a mini kingdom. That seems to be what the kingdom is these days. And it's almost like a flip. There's two ways of this, I think. You have like sort of the Marxist way of looking at it, which is we're going to create a kingdom, and that's going to influence our minds. So our happiness rests on what's on the outside. But it's the flip side of that, which is Christianity, which is the flip side to that. Like the Marxism stuff is overtly atheist, anti-Christian in everything. You can't even say Christ's name. The Christian one is the opposite way. It's the complete opposite way around. It's like, sort out the internal kingdom first. You know, believe in Jesus, and that will create the outside.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the core conflict of what's going on. Where modern people are like, because they do all the time. Talk to anybody. Well, maybe not anybody, depends on what your profession is. But knowing in academia, you talk to anybody, and they're always like, well, this problem would be better if we outsourced it to the government. It's like, well, maybe that would be the case. You know, that sounds absolutely okay, but that's the beginning of an actual thread, which leads all the way up to, we call it creeping socialism, I guess. It's like a little nexus towards the whole kingdom on the outside, attacking or oppressing down on the individual, where the opposite way around should be, which is the Christ message. Our own internal kingdom is what goes ahead and shapes the outside. And when you start thinking about, I guess 1984 did a beautiful prophetic job at this, and as did Brave New World. It's like we have things like the internet, which is connecting all of our minds together. And then you have things like the thought police, which come along and try to make us all completely and utterly homogenous. So I think you can see that archetype of the global kingdom. You could talk about it in a conspiracy way if you want to, but it seems to be pretty bloody clear that it's real. People are trying to bring this about. It's like,
keep going.
We're going to make.
Hello.
What?
Fucker after cutting out again.
I hope I'm still here. Am I still here?
God. Hello.
Am I still here?
Hello? Hello?
Hello, Jesus, Lord. Am I still here?
Yes, you're still there. My God. I think
Sweet Lord.
the deep state
Why does
got
this
you.
always happen?
Just because you're talking.
Every time we talk about this, for some reason, the internet cuts out. We did it on the
Man,
flat Earth stream as well, dude. You mentioned the flat Earth, and it's cut out.
don't
They
mention
don't
the
want
flat
us to know
Earth.
the truth.
Don't mention the flat Earth as well. To be like, we got them on 3 counts. The fucking Israel, the communist New World Order, flat Earth. These guys, they're done. That will just be like, boyo's over now. Someone will come in and just nut all over us and like Spider-Man, just throw us up against the wall and then arrest us or something like that. So, like, let's pass on. Here. What you're talking about there, I kind of lost the last 5 minutes of it. But it's like what you're talking about is like absolutely on the money. It's like what the hell is this kingdom that's dominating our current minds? And it does seem to be a absolving of personal responsibility in some weird way. It does seem to be it's build a kingdom outside to save me. And I think this is a satanic bargain, if I was to say it honestly. Like, it does seem, and this wraps in with the Aion prophecy of Faustianism and all that stuff, where it seems like the state has got to a position, the archetype, I guess you could say, the dark version of the archetype has turned into the state that offers you the ability to save you from suffering. Where instead of you taking the kingdom of God as within path and saving yourself from suffering, the state offers to save you from suffering. And I think it's a complicated role. It offers to save you from suffering, and so you give up your own personal power to it, and that's like a devil's bargain. So the devil gains more power off you, and it's almost as if the devil itself is the machine, and it swells, and more and more people give themselves up to it, and it controls more and more minds, and it controls more and more people, and it gathers more people into a destiny, and it almost becomes like a Venus flytrap, you know. So you smell the good social welfare, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and then suddenly it closes around you, but it's closed around millions of people, and then it swallows you up. And that sounds like, you know, a paranoid metaphor, but my God, man, you have got to read more about communism. What happened there? It was literally like they were. I'll read out some principles of you now. Like they offered them a utopia. So they came and they said, there will be a utopia, there will be a utopia, there will be a utopia, we'll give it to you. The people in the way are the aristocracy, all right? And then you see what their plan was. First, the revolution must take place in order to overthrow the existing government. Total destruction of the existing system. A dictator or an elite leader must gain absolute control over the proletariat. The proletariat are the people. During this phase, absolute control. During this phase, the new government exerts absolute control over the common citizens' personal choices. This is everything that you asked for when you said, kingdom archetype, save me from suffering. I will give up all my power to you if you save me from suffering. So you're getting it. Now the devil is like, all right, I'll give it to you. You didn't want this. And they take it from you, and then it's education, religion, everything, marriage, collectivization of property. Collectivization of property is pretty much they come in, they take property, and they give it to the government. And so suddenly now, whoever has overthrown the aristocracy has this position where they are collectivizing everything. They're getting all the power, and everything that's valuable just starts flowing towards them. All of your work goes towards them. All of your property goes towards them. All of your rights go toward them. They decide everything. It becomes completely authoritarian. And then weirdly, interestingly, the communist government hated Christianity and just went absolutely insane, murdering Christians specifically, and destroying churches and killing the intelligentsia, murdering priests and whatnot. So it's a very, very strange, like it's almost like a Satan's dream of some sort, or you could say the dark dream of some sort. It's a very, very weird and twisted idea, but it's all related to that psychology fundamentally, where people were like, they would buy into it. So it was like a trap. They bought into it at the start when the revolutionary stuff was going on, because they couldn't find a way out of suffering. It's very interesting.
Yeah, if Christ currently is sitting on the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God is within, and something like the Gospel of Thomas makes this like ridiculously clear, writes this down. It's something like, if you drink from my mouth, which is a really weird image, if you drink from my mouth, you'll become like me, you'll become me. So there's an idea that you are Christ and Christ is you, and you're all together. So if you've got the idea of the kingdom, it's in your head, Christ is sitting there. What the communists are doing, and this is why it's satanic, because it's satanic meaning opposite of Christ, antichrist, then they're saying, wherever Christ is sitting on your internal kingdom, boop, off you go, throw you away. that kingdom is now mine. They rob you of everything. You're no longer an individual. Nothing belongs to you. Your individuality is gone. So that's that kingdom. Your family is gone. That's the next kingdom around you. Your community doesn't exist. It's completely dissolved and belongs to some kind of outside force. And the outside force, because it's the opposite of individuality, is the Antichrist. So that is the quickest proof as to why communism is satanic.
Got you, motherfuckers. Done. Bow down, get the fuck out. We've just disproven you. I think it is though, like, to be honest, if we're, and I like basing this stuff as almost as nearly as physically as I possibly could. And I've said this many times and I'll say it again, is that the idea of equality is representative of the principle of entropy that dominates the universe. And so if you build an ideology around the idea of equality, you're essentially asking for entropy. And communism is built around that. And entropy is death. That's fundamentally what it is. So it is literally on a physical level. If you want to talk about memetics in a physical level, psychologically, it's a cult of death. And if you look at what God might represent, and this is where Nietzsche kind of confused me for years, because Nietzsche said Christianity was a nihilistic death cult, but it seems like Christianity is a pro-life religion far more than it is a death cult per se. And God is representative of the logos order that you follow in order to create life. That's way different than communism, you know. Like, communism was not about logos at all. It was anti-logos. It was about throwing away the order and absolving that order to Satan, essentially, who was represented through the established elite, which was taught by Stalin at one point. But nonetheless, it wasn't like a Christian movement, which was like, at the very basic, it was like start a family and produce children and you know, run a good household. And there's a smaller version of the archetype, is the household. And so it's interesting in that sense. Let's hammer, like, we've got a lot to do here because this is such a huge topic. But I'm just trying to assert this idea that there's archetypes in our minds that give us predictive power over history. And it's weird and it's a big claim, but I think the evidence is pretty much harshly out there. Like, if you get a group of people who get obsessed with an archetype, it's very easy to predict what they're going to do. George Soros is not going to suddenly start, you know, turning into a nationalist. He, with his billions, he's going to keep working to try open them borders, no matter what. That's it. That's just the way the game is going. And the more people push in mass migration without question and annoy the Europeans, the more nationalism is going to swell and swell and swell. So the more the people who don't want nationalism are going to start oppressing nationalism. And these things are just inevitable. This is how the game works. And you'll be able to watch for all this. But the most important thing to watch for will be what happens in the Middle East, because that does seem to be something talked about a lot, and it ties us back to the mimetic destiny of the book that is the spine of our culture, and that is the Bible, which in Revelations talks about this place, Jerusalem, coming back to this. And it's astounding, but whoever wrote 2,000 years ago that our heads would be back here still got it right, it seems. That's crazy, man. Crazy. When you laid it out, that's just insane. Another reason why people writing off the Bible are just way more ignorant than the Christians they try to make fun of, you know.
100%, dude. 100%. Is there anything more you want to cover on these paragraphs, or shall we crack on into the next one?
I think we're on 70. I think we should just fire on in.
Beautiful. So page 37, anyone reading along? So these few familiar references should be sufficient to make the psychological position of the Christ symbol quite clear. Christ exemplifies the archetype of the self. He represents a totality of a divine or heavenly kind, a glorified man, a son of God, sine macula peccati, unspotted by sin. As Adam secundus, he corresponds to the first Adam before the fall, when the latter was still a pure image of God, of which Tertullian says, quote, "And this, therefore, is to be considered as the image of God in man, that the human spirit has the same motions and senses as God has, though not in the same way as God has them," end quote. Origen is very much more explicit. The imago Dei, imprinted on the soul, not on the body, is an image of an image. Quote, "For my soul is not directly the image of God, but is made after the likeness of the former image," end quote. Christ, on the other hand, is the true image of God, after whose likeness our inner man is made, invisible, incorporeal, incorrupt, and immortal. The God image in us reveals itself through, quote, "prudentia Eostastalum, end quote. What do you think about all that?
This is I find this a very dense and hard part of the book because he's going through something very technical that I think his people would get. But the way I read it is him as Jung trying to describe what the archetype of the self usually presents to us, and it usually presents to us the idea of the hero, the Messiah, as I said, the idea of the ideal man, the idea of person, the meaning. Ubermensch, Nietzsche hit on that, and he came up with the Ubermensch. That's another very powerful archetype. It's astounding that you always see it everywhere. You had Nietzsche, and he got rid of Christianity, but he still couldn't escape the archetypes. He says we need to create an Ubermensch. We need to create a savior. We need a Messiah. The Jews are in the same place. The reason why they don't believe they have their temple is because they're waiting for a Messiah to come and establish it. And so it is that idea of what is the ideal man and what will he do for us, and will he be a historical figure? And Christianity seems to give us this ideal that the greatest possible man is not necessarily a bodily or political figure, more so a person who acts with a certain energy. And this is why Christianity is interesting, is that it's trying to take you out of the realm of politics. It's trying to take you out of that stuff and say that Jesus was so great, not because he created a great kingdom like Alexander the Great, but because he lived in a great way. He was a great style. And if you want to get in touch with what's the most benevolent, most powerful nature of mankind, what is the part of man that is most godlike, you just look at a man who acts the most godlike, and that turns out to be Jesus. And what is that? That's a vibe. It's a style of life. It's an energy. It's behavior. So this is where you get a really simple way to conceptualize this is when you're stuck and you don't know what to do, you ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And then you just go forward and do that. And that's not getting you in touch with like what did Jesus look like? You're not being like, was bodybuilder stuff. It's more thinking to yourself, what type of vibe was he? What type of energy? What type of presentation?
Although a lot of the images of Christ, really interestingly, are him being ridiculously handsome, unbelievably handsome, and him being really ripped. In the church I go to, we've got this I don't actually go that often anymore, but there is this crucifix. Jesus is on the cross. He's dead. He's a suffering boyo, but he is jacked as hell. Like he's got the like massive arms. He's got this proper little six-pack going on. So that idea of perfection actually does apply to the physical in many ways. So like, what would the perfect man be? And it's like, yeah, this really handsome jacked bloke.
And this is interesting because when Jesus, like we don't really know what he looked like, because the problem with the Middle East and the Levant specifically is that there's many blonde, blue-eyed people in Palestine, but there's also many people who look Arab. And there's been an admixture of Muslims have been there for centuries, but there's also the original people who are Semitic just generally, and they look way more European. And then there is a style of people who look like almost like, Ukrainian Aryans or something like that. So it's really weird. We don't know what he looked like, but every culture he goes into, he turns into that culture. Like the Ethiopians have him as a black dude. And then the Romans, when he first came in there, he was always like a jacked Roman general, just being like, I'm Jesus, man. And it's interesting the way we do that, because he is sitting on that archetype of the self, and it's almost like how we see ourselves. And so the Irish Jesus is he looks like an Irish person. It's so funny.
He's got a pint of Guinness in his hand. He's got a little St. Paddy's Day hat on. Actually, to be fair, there is the Irish song "Lord of the Dance," which I find absolutely hilarious because it's the biblical story told, but where Jesus is Irish dancing all over Bethlehem. So that does make perfect sense.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? It's really mad. It's like, and this is where the Jesus myth becomes really, and like Jung gets into this now in the next chapter, where he says the level of symbolic layering over on top of this man has been so immense that it's actually very hard to know the actual true, objective story. But then at the same time, it's not necessarily like we need to know the objective story per se, because it's almost like the story happened and we will interpret it whatever way, but it seems like the general story happened, and the symbols are powerful enough.
Yeah, I want to get into some psychology here, because it's ridiculously heavy stuff. But if you take the idea of the self seriously, then you also have to take the idea of Christ seriously. And by that, I don't mean you have to go and bend on your knee and confess that Christ is the Lord and Savior, because it's incredibly difficult to do that now, which is our problem, the death of God problem. But you have to take it seriously as a psychic phenomenon. So what does that mean, that Christ is a symbol of the self, which Jung, I think for the first time in this whole book, has actually explicitly stated, and we've been referencing it this entire time. So Adam before the fall, it's implied that he was actually unconscious, which is a weird idea, because when he became like gods and learned the nature of true good and evil by eating that fruit from the tree, tempted by this Satan snake, then his eyes opened and he became aware of things. And that's when the fall happened. It's when his eyes opened. So he became aware. If you remember back in when we were talking about the ego, I think it was lecture 2, then you might not remember it, but you have a feeling when suddenly your ego, you will come into development. You'll become aware of things. And that's basically you falling, in a sense. Because before then, you just sort of follow what your parents do. You follow what society does. You just go to the whim of the unconscious. You're not completely unconscious, obviously. You can make your own choices. When you become aware of things, life then becomes incredibly difficult, because you become aware of all your insufficiencies and all the ways in which life is terrible and will probably kill you. And it will probably kill you. So Jesus corresponds to that Adam before the fall, who's unconscious. So in many ways, Jesus is representing the perfect man before the fall, and he rests within your head. If you think about what the self is, it's psychic totality. So it's everything. It's you as an ego, and it's the anima and the animus. It's absolutely everything, and it seems to stretch across all of time, which is a fascinating idea. So when your ego develops and it comes from the self, what Jung's talking about regarding the imago Dei, which means the image of God, is before your ego came about, before there was you, Fred, watching this, there was the essence of Fred, who is like the image of God, the will of God, where all the forces are coming from. And then you're born of that, and there's little Fred walking around, and he suddenly becomes aware that he's broken and he's shit, because Fred is shit. You know, you masturbate far too much. You have sexual intercourse with goats. You know, you're insufficient in a million different ways. But there is still that voice in the back of your head that's perfect. And the way our culture, unconsciously, consciously, we don't know, probably unconsciously, that's represented that ubiquitous phenomenon that we all feel across all humans, is that Christ idea, where there is, you come from God, you come from the self, and you develop insufficient, your eyes open, but there is always that Christ image, the perfect man, the person you could be, all of your potential, because it stretches across time, and that's there talking to you all the time. So that's why Christ is a symbol of the self. He's perfect. He's man, like you, ego, and he's divine, like the self. So you have to take the idea of Christ seriously in our culture. So that's what I have to say on that nice bit of psychology there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've thought about it a lot. Like, is it interchangeable? Can you choose a different hero than Jesus? And in a weird way, you can, of course. Like, you can be like, you can choose Odin, and you can choose Tyler Durden, and you can choose Conor McGregor. Like, you can choose to follow heroes. You can choose to see them as the way you'd like to be, as some sort. But I think Jung's implying...
This is the thing, though. If you pick Tyler Durden, like lots of young guys are going to do, that won't lead you in beautiful places. It will lead you to insufficient places. Because Tyler Durden's very good at some things and very, very bad at other things. Like, awful at other things. So, like, the self is the archetype that we all have. And it seems to be that our culture has put an image on it to make it so that we can communicate with the self properly, which is Christ. So you can consciously swap it, I guess, but that won't be very good. It seems to be you can unconsciously produce somebody else. I don't know what a similar self symbol would be other than Christ. I don't think we've seen it before. Like, because not even God the Father is the self; it's Christ. Are there any others? I don't know.
It's the great man. Like, it's the Messiah archetype. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a great leader. And this is the paradox of it is that you could choose Tyler Durden. You could choose, as you said, you could choose almost any symbol, but would it bring you in touch with your true nature? It's a very, very weird idea. It's almost like there is a way you have a true nature, and whatever symbol you use to access that true nature will determine whether you actually get full access to it. Like, if you go and you choose Tyler Durden, does that really make you turn into the best version of yourself, because maybe you become this sort of parody version of yourself or something like that. Whereas if you choose Odin, like, does that make you become the absolute best version of yourself? Like, why did Christianity win out? Is it because for whatever reason Jesus symbolizes the absolute best, highest order abstraction principles that you need to represent the best part of humanity, which is, I guess, something along the lines of self-sacrifice and total belief in your divinity as a person, your value, your value as a created being of some sort. Whereas all these other heroes, they're sort of lower level or something like that. Is that how it works? Like, they don't bring you properly in touch with that true self. And is that objectively saying that there is something to Christianity that it got right more than anything else? Or is it, like Nietzsche says, is it a case of relativism? Like, are you able to swap that in with an Ubermensch? Like, I think that's what Nietzsche tried to do. Nietzsche tried to come in and sit the Ubermensch on top of that and say, this is what we need ourselves to be. We need to move on to this new image, this new idea. And was that possible? Like, are we able to do that? Nietzsche, for example, said that the problem with the Ubermensch and the reason why it's so anti-Christian is because it's positing the idea that we're not good enough as we are, and we must sacrifice ourselves. God must not sacrifice himself to us. We must sacrifice ourselves in order to create the next step of human. So it's a very, very dangerous idea when you really get down to it, because that justifies someone in the elites of society turning around and saying every single person on this planet is not worth one Ubermensch, so I can gladly enslave them all and make them build an Ubermensch. And like, what would that be? Who knows? And it does leave you in that place for slavery of some sort. But Nietzsche's worry is that if we get too obsessed with the idea of Christianity, we get stuck on the idea that humanity is so valuable that we stop evolving, and it becomes dysgenic in that type of way. So it's a very, very, very hard to play with that. It's hard to know, like, is it relative? Can you put anybody on the self and that will just change the outcome slightly? Or is it somewhat like, was Christianity the most accurate one? I guess that's what I'm saying.
I'm going to throw this at you because I've just thought about this here. Maybe you can answer this. So Nietzsche's idea of the Ubermensch, the baseline is like, we have to create our own values, and that's a product of the will. So Nietzsche almost was like, off you go, Christ, you've sat it for 2,000 years, we're going to put something else on top, a non-specific character, an Ubermensch. Could that be, so that this Zarathustra character, I guess, could that be the God of the Old Testament, or God the Father itself, that which creates values? So instead, it's someone who's like, it's almost heretical against God the Father, but it's that's exact same archetype, that which creates values. So it's identical. He just thinks, because of, I guess, arrogance of the will. And I don't want to put Nietzsche down, but I'll just say arrogance of the will, that you can knock that down and put it on top.
As in, Nietzsche had the arrogance to think that he could reevaluate the preconditions for a great man.
No, so Zarathustra or Ubermensch, whatever character you want to put there, is exactly the same archetypal idea as God the Father or as Christ, that which is the source of the values.
I think I'm trying to put that forward, is that Nietzsche was putting, I think it's a different symbol in my opinion, but Nietzsche's trying to put that symbol on top of the same throne that Christ had. So the idea is that am I getting your question right? At the root, there is a throne that Zeus was on for the Greeks, that Christ was on for the Christians, the king, and then was that throne. Did Nietzsche say that the person who ascends to this throne now is the Ubermensch, and he doesn't even exist yet? So he is literally
yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, it's the same archetype. That he hasn't created a new archetype. He still exists within the current archetypal framework, where there is still the idea of the kingdom. There is still the idea of that which creates values, and that which creates values sits on top of the throne and creates the kingdom. So he may be creating things from his will, but he exists within that archetypal framework.
I think Nietzsche was trying to posit something advanced. He was trying to say that like the Ubermensch was specifically like almost like an Iron Man type figure, like harder to kill, taller, stronger, but smarter. Like it is almost as if you could take a basic premise like our IQ and you could just wind that up to 2 million. Like Nietzsche was sort of saying it's like something we will physically create. We'll breed it, one, and we'll also use science to help us in that type of way. And it was that type of idea. It's like what can we, it's transhumanism essentially. What could we build in that way? I don't think that's like anything we've seen in the past, although it could be. Like, I see what you're sort of saying. Like, maybe God was the one who created Adam, and Adam lived for a long time. There was that weird phenomenon where all the biblical characters were just like walking around like juicy as fuck for thousands of years. I think 1,000 years is like 900 years is their general staying time. So yeah, I guess in that way, like you were going back to Adam. So it's an old symbol, but Nietzsche had this more of this idea of like a savage political leader. Like the Ubermensch is sort of Antichrist, like in a weird way.
Yeah. So again, I get kind of cynical about that idea, and I'm again not trying to put Nietzsche down, but Nietzsche is such a central character to all of this. He thought that he was. So he wanted, okay, he believed the Ubermensch would exist in the future, that they weren't here yet. People are born posthumously, right? They will exist one day. But then at the same time, he thought he was the one to reevaluate all values. So was he putting himself as the Ubermensch, the proto-Ubermensch? So he'd replaced Christ with himself. Because if the Ubermensch are defined as that which sits on top of the hierarchy and could create their own values, and he defined himself as the only man who could reevaluate all the values, is he swapping Christ with himself?
No. And Nietzsche was saying, I think someone said it in the chat there, man is a bridge. So he was suggesting that he was suggesting that, look, I am not going to be the Ubermensch. You're not going to be the Ubermensch. No one's going to be the Ubermensch. But what we need to do is start the project towards the Ubermensch. Nietzsche talks a lot about the idea that the big problem with liberalism is that it can in no way allow for long-term planning. You just don't see royal families spending 1,000 years trying to create great political projects because liberalism is so democratic. Maybe democracy is probably the better thing he was criticizing there. And so like the politicians interchange every fucking 4 years. Whereas Nietzsche was like, all great cultures were a result of a group of people, usually a group of ethnicities, getting dominated by a powerful ethnicity like the Vikings. And then they would all gather together and say, how do we spend 1,000 years gathering industry and gold and projects and all that? Like the Germans, after they got beaten by Napoleon, they spent a couple of 100 years trying to figure their shit. They spent 100 years trying to figure their shit out. And they created like they created all that capital and power that was capable, that was ready for World War I and World War II, where they spent it all. And it's that idea. It's like, if we could get together as a people and say, what are we going to build towards? And let's aim at the Ubermensch. So it's not like Nietzsche's necessarily even saying what the Ubermensch is. He's just saying, like, the biggest problem we have now is that we're aiming low. And it's going to get lower if we keep following Christianity, because Christianity is about self-sacrifice and like it's a death cult in some ways. So I guess that's the way he meant it in that sense. But if we put a new person on the self, if we put the Ubermensch on the self, this is simply an idea of like, how do we focus our efforts not on waiting for God to come and save us, but instead focus all of our political efforts towards creating an excellent man. And to be honest, to a large extent, I agree with Nietzsche on this. Like, why? Well, I know why, but there is a current anti-male and anti-excellence and anti-beauty cult going on in the modern world. And you look back at the Greeks, they put all those statues of men standing like, you know, in great heroic postures. Like, that's just not there anymore because people don't believe in men anymore. And Nietzsche was warning about that. He says people will get tired of masculinity and man, because if we don't start this new belief where man can become great, even greater than he is now. So
yeah. I don't want to push you too hard on this, but I guess people might like to see this
because
Nietzsche seems to be a real big talking point throughout all these lectures for obvious reasons. He was a proper G. But so you say you agree to some degree, at least, with Nietzsche's idea of the Ubermensch. It's a powerful idea. There's weight to it. We have to look into that. But then at the same time, you seem very, very pro-Christian at the same time. So it's like, you have Christ and you have whatever Christ was all about, you know, and then you have the Ubermensch and the Ubermensch creating their own values. Where's that overlap in your head between them? So where's the problem between them? Would it be like Christian morality and then personal excellence put together? Because that still seems compatible with Christianity. So I'm confused. Yeah. Do you think there's something that the Ubermensch can provide that Christianity is directly opposed to?
It would mainly be about the idea of sacrifice and God's plan and planning. So it is compatible in the sense that I don't see why Christianity should exclude the idea of the ideal male. Now it doesn't necessarily favor that, but like the Greek emphasis on become the best man you can. But Christianity, if you just see Jesus as a symbol of a man who stands up for, like, stands up for principles, that's the most masculine you can get. And so Christianity is very compatible with male excellence if you look at it that way. So I don't really see a big problem there. And I think Nietzsche's thrust can blend with that quite a lot. Like Nietzsche strawmans Christianity a little bit, I feel. He kind of makes it even more cooked than it seems. So I'm still not, like, the jury's out on that. I'm still not sure I quite get him properly, but I see that going on. But the tension point is more to do with the idea of sacrifice. It's like, what do we sacrifice ourselves to? What do we hold ourselves? What do we like? The same way as you kill the goat towards the god, you will die towards the kingdom. It's the most valuable thing. It is the god to you. And so you will sacrifice your belief in yourself towards Christ, because Christ sacrificed himself for you. It's like you give up this idea that you need to be better than Jesus because you accept that Jesus is the best man that ever lived.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a problem for Nietzsche, because he's saying that Jesus wasn't the best man who ever lived. He was just a pretty cool dude. Like Nietzsche liked Jesus. He was just like, like Nietzsche was like the only Christian died in the cross. And that's actually a compliment. It's like Jesus was a G. He died in the cross, but he wasn't the highest we could go. And that was his warning. It's like you sacrifice your belief that you can become better than you are. You can become godlike, if you will, for the sake of accepting that Christ is the best version of yourself. He is yourself, as Jung is telling us. And then the Ubermensch goes in that place, and it's just simply a belief that I can go even higher than I am now. And it's like physical, like we can build ourselves bigger. We can improve our IQ. We can do greater things than this. But in order for this to happen, it's almost like a socialist project that needs to get put into place. And that involves killing Christ. It involves sacrificing Christ. It says there's no gods, there's no sacredness, there's only humanity. And the only thing that's going to save us is belief in a higher human. But the problem, as I said, is that leads you down that road where you say that all humans are not valuable compared to the Ubermensch. So therefore, we can kill humans to build it. Slavery's back on the cards. And it's like there's loads of people I see on Facebook groups and all this shit talking about Nietzsche. And they're like, oh, people read Nietzsche wrong. They make him to seem all cruel, and they make him seem all brutal and all this stuff. And I'm just like, man, like, you don't know the half of it. Like, if you fully chewed on what I was just saying there and what Nietzsche was implying, that we should sacrifice all of humanity for the sake of the Ubermensch, that means that, like, everybody who's weak gets just obliterated because they're a problem, and they don't have any will anymore. Their will gets cultivated as part of this project of the Ubermensch. Like, Nietzsche's not a liberal. Like, he's like, the Ubermensch is all that matters, and we all work towards creating him. And yeah, it's crazy thoughts.
Yeah, it's obviously throughout these lectures we've pedestalized logos to some degree. Trying not to be biased, but there does seem to be an element of logos is a good idea. Look what it's produced. But then at the same time, once we get that far, it always seems to be a case of, what about Nietzsche? And then it pulls you away from that as well, and then it chucks logos off the top of it, and it's like, what if it's the really sexy, juicy, high IQ boyo? And it's like, maybe we're doing the exact same thing, that exact same Aion framework where the ions are shifting, even in our own heads, even on this, even though the deep state want to shut it down. It's the exact same thing. Move further and further towards Christ. It's no more. Nietzsche is such a pain in the ass in that manner, which is why I keep dreaming about him. He keeps haunting me.
Yeah, he's a very hard man to get around. And this is good because he makes you think. And I think the best way to deal with Nietzsche is actually a massive amount of humility. If you admit that you don't really understand his riddles and you try work through them slowly, they start to reveal themselves to you a lot more. But you can get, like, I found when I started reading them, I was just like, yep, the Ubermensch right, because this guy's prestigious. And then you're like, definitely Ubermensch. And then what happens is you become anti-Christian in some sense, and then you're just going around being like, Christianity's for the ignorant. And then Jung humbles your ass up about that, and then you can actually come back to Nietzsche and be like, oh fuck, now I actually see what he's saying. And it's not necessarily that he was just setting up something, but it's not necessarily that he was 100% right. The jury's out on what he's saying, but it's very hard to figure out if he's wrong as well. I don't know, man.
Well, we've talked about the will of God idea, and the idea our morality comes from this will of God, from the self, the voice in the back of our heads. What Nietzsche is essentially talking about is that changing the conscience as well. Because if it's telling you to do one thing, a value will say. Nietzsche's coming at it from another point of view. So this is where, to be completely intellectually honest, this is where somewhat out of fear, somewhat out of this is easy, I do tend to go, Jung has disproved that Nietzsche could ever possibly be correct. Because we do have our own values embedded within us. So in other words, Jung's saying values come from the unconscious, not from the conscious. And if you do them from the conscious and you project them onto the unconscious, you end up in somewhere like Soviet Russia, and that's always been an absolute disaster. So the same thing seems to be the case from Nietzsche. So I don't think Nietzsche's Ubermensch could possibly be true in its essence, creating our own values. In terms of excellence, you could debate about what society should move towards in terms of excellence, but that's not changing our values necessarily.
I don't think
there will always be the conscience in the back of our heads.
I don't think Nietzsche was. I think Nietzsche was saying we should orientate ourselves around a cult of excellence and strength. And the thing that holds us back from doing that is our moral brainwashing by weak religions like Christianity. Essentially, like, you have to get into the master slave thing, but if we want to cut it short, the Jews were too weak to fight the Romans. Again, Nietzsche's interesting. He brings us back to that period in history. He says the Jews are too weak to fight the Romans. And so what they had to do is they had to subvert the Romans to put themselves on top. And Jesus was the manifestation of that. Interestingly, it wasn't the Jews themselves. It was Christ. It was very weird the way it worked out. But nonetheless, Christ represents the ultimate apotheosis of Jewish consciousness, which is it's anti-strength, it's subversive, it's like you have to respect the weak, it's equality essentially. And so Nietzsche warns that what you're doing is you're pedestalizing there something that's not Roman excellence of absolute total instinctive strength. And you want to ask a serious question of, do you want to lead with that in the future? Or do you want to build a cult like the Greeks around the idea that all of our men are not about being nice, they're about being brutal, harsh, and strong. It's a cult of nature in essence. And how far could you take reality if you did that? And are those two things incompatible? I don't know, but there does seem to be Nietzsche's asserting a value that actually was there before, and I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if you can completely just throw it off the table. I don't even think Jung's critique is like nails it properly, because Nietzsche's not trying to create new values. He's almost like going back to an older form of values, and he's talking like,
changing the archetype. So you might say he's going from Christ to Aries or something along those lines.
That's not right either. Like when he's talking about this Ubermensch, he's saying the reason why the Jews took over like the culture, they culturally subverted the Romans and put Jesus there. And Nietzsche does frame Jesus as a Jewish thing, which is again problematic because Jesus was not a Jewish thing. So like it's complicated, but nonetheless, well, I'm just making it simpler than it is. In order to put them there, to do that subversion, it's because the Jews are smarter. That simply, like they just outplayed the game. They were willing to play. They were willing to play culturally, with this idea that if they could take over the minds, they could win. And he calls the reason, he says, lamenting that the weak and the slave morality always wins in the end, because it's just the majority wins. Like if you go into a massive Roman state, the elites at the top who are strong will literally just lose to the giant population that they're controlling when the population gets woken up by a revolutionary movement like Christianity. So it's just a tragedy. It's like, fuck, the slaves always win. So the only way we're going to create a greater person is somehow combine those two modes of consciousness. We'll take the sneakiness and the smartness and the crudeness and the almost like the ability to jostle out of natural instincts to worship strength towards like self arrogance of saying, even though I'm weak, I'm still valuable. We'll be able to take that sneakiness and that relativism and apply it to excellence. So it's a combination of the two, and then you create a new value. I guess it's sort of what we're doing here a little bit. It's about crafting the instincts around a new value of sorts. It's a very complicated process, but I'm not sure he's talking about something new.
But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if you can do that without falling into the prey of an archetype. Because if there are forces in the back of your head, the archetypes that are stronger than you are, which Jung has been suggesting that there are, then I guarantee that you'll fall into the prey of those. Shall we hit the chat and then call this a day? Since this is part 2.
It's quite, so we don't get to look at Aquinas. That's tragedy. Yes. Let's do the chat from yesterday as well. So people, hello people. So our chat got stopped with the deep state. We've gone heavy into the Antichrist, but we would love to hear your questions on this topic. Ask us whatever you got. Write them down there in the chat on the bottom right. Type in and say, yo, James, yo, Stefan, boyos, what's going on with the old Antichrist there? Give us the lowdown.
Please ask Stefan the most personal questions you could ever think of. Please.
Fucking dickhead. So yeah, tell us, give us a sus, tell us what's up. I'm sure we'll get to you. We'll sort it all out. I'm going to just get the other one up on the screen now. Stefan, you've spoken about taking LSD. Thank you very much, James.
Hey!
Our Psychedelics boyo approved. I'll let James take that one.
Our Psychedelics boyo approved. I have at least never consciously taken psychedelics. I'll put it like that. Okay, so what's your motivation for wanting to go and take psychedelics? It depends on your age, I suppose. It's like part of you will want to do it because it's exciting and it's a rush and what's going to be on the other side, but then I don't think that's a wise idea, especially if you're not in a particularly good place, because that then becomes an excuse to come and fix your life for you. So if you're going to do it, and I don't endorse this, obviously, because then the deep state will shut this stream down again. If you're going to do it, just know that you might have a very bad trip. That's all I'm going to say on that.
I love James's story of being drugged.
I've told the story of how I've been drugged once. Yeah. I've told that story a couple of times.
You've spoken about taking LSD. Our Psychedelics boyo approved. Jung says, "Beware of wisdom you have not earned." I think that's a great way to put it. I've done them before. I think they're amazing and an amazing experience. There's literally nothing quite like them, but I think you'll change your life more from hitting the gym consistently than taking LSD. Like it's hard to say this because there's a certain type of person who will benefit immensely. Like, the more shaman types, the artist types. You can break yourself out of ruts. You can have very interesting mystical experiences. I wouldn't wipe them off the board. I think they have a place, but the way our current culture deals with them, Jesus Christ, be careful. I know people who do a load of coke and then they go into some after party, a load of alcohol, and then they hit some DMT, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, man, that stuff must just rot you. Like, I don't know, can you do that stuff? It's too that's just like, I've heard of people talk about what they experience on DMT, and you hear Alex Jones saying that the CIA are sitting down there getting people out of their minds on DMT to talk to like interdimensional spirits. And again, man, you just don't know who you're talking to in those spaces. You don't know what's going on. Like, are you talking to your deep mind? Are you talking to an interdimensional being? Like, it's so hard to know. So I'd be very, very careful about doing that. I think I'd save it. I'd just treat it sacred, Don't build your life around it, and treat it sacred. They're the two most important things, because it's fundamentally religious in its experience. It will change you. Like, I guess that's the only thing I can say. It will change you. It will open your mind. It will tap into your imagination like you've never experienced before in your life. But people often think that they can take it to solve problems. Like, it's not going to solve your problems, man. You're going to solve your problems. Don't do it in any of that way. Like, it is. If you use it as a crutch, it will break your leg. It's more like just an amazing experience that I guess you should try once in your life. I'd say. I've really, like, I definitely don't regret doing them. But at the same time, it's so poorly treated in modern society. So I'd just be very wary about that.
Yeah, if psychedelics take the boundary between your conscious mind and the collective unconscious, and from reading Jung that the collective unconscious is not all friendly, it's only half friendly, and the friendly side is ridiculously mysterious and terrifying, then what you're doing basically is saying, Come on, evil spirits. Or you're doing Russian roulette with evil spirit or good spirit. So it's up to you. Completely up to you. I'm too conservative for that. I'd be like, nah, I'm not having evil spirits. I've got too many things to worry about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, me. Like if you wanna be an artist, like I found more creative punch out of dream reading for a long time than I did taking any drugs. But at the same time, there was a creative punch out of taking drugs like LSD. So it's there, it's real, but you have to, I guess, contextualize it. Don't fall into the cult where people like worship it as some type of solution to all of life's problems. Like it's not. It will hold you back like anything else. It is. Yeah, I just see too many people with bad attitudes towards it, and that's something you got to watch for. Like treat it seriously, I guess that's it. I can't say it's boyo approved because I don't know. The jury's out on that. I'm no expert in that, but you've heard my thoughts, so keep that in mind. Hey, did you notice the Dajjal was one-eyed and so was Odin? This is from yesterday. I think Carl Jung's very true. There's some super weird stuff with the mind, quite supernatural, based on dreams. Yeah, dreams are crazy. I did not know that Dajjal was one-eyed. That is interesting. That's very interesting. Demon Sharid Ravik. He's one that's good. There was a question here from yesterday that I just want to find before. Jesus lived in the time after the great philosophers of ancient Greece. Is it a big reach to say he may have had an education? What do you think, James?
Yes, he would have had an education. I can imagine that question was asked to say, was he influenced by it in terms of his philosophy? It's like, I don't think so. I think whether or not Jesus had an education in the Greeks is irrelevant to what Jesus said and did. Because if this is how it appears to me anyway, the mythological and the human touched on the changings of the Aeons, which we don't understand. So it's so irrelevant to what he learned before. Although if that's the case, then Greek civilization might well have also been influenced by the Aeons too. So it is relevant in a way because the passage of time would have led up to him as like a crux point of all the energy. But yeah, I think he was probably he was a rabbi, wasn't he? So he would have been educated.
I don't think Jesus was a rabbi, was he? No, I don't think so.
I could have sworn he was a rabbi. That's how lots of cynical people described him anyway. They're like he was some mad rabbi running around.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think he was technically a rabbi. He was more just a dude. He was like a carpenter and was like, hey, I've figured some shit out. They're like, who are you? And he's like, I'm son of God. Like, come on. And they're like, are you a rabbi? And he's like, I'm the son of God. Like, this is it. So I think it's.
To be fair, he did answer son of God to like all the questions, or riddles to all the questions anyway. So it might have been throwing it away anyway.
He was a boyo. It's terrifying how human the mushrooms are. Yeah, see stuff like that, man. It's so crazy. I smoked weed and passed out and broke my jaw and split my chin to the bone. What the fuck? Psilocybin mushrooms are clearly in the human collective unconscious if you take them intelligently. Yeah, man. Like shrooms you hear some crazy stories about that. There's apparently a voice you can find on mushrooms. That's from Terence McKenna. I heard that. And it's like a specific mushroom voice, as if you're talking to an entity. Man, it could be there. Really, I don't know what that stuff is. I don't know how it relates. There's something very interesting there by all means. I just think
I'm going to just really quickly use this as an opportunity to plug. So I did this a few months ago. If you go on my channel, I don't know if it's linked down below, just search my name. I do have a podcast with a guy called Victor Valentine, who has done, we'll say, a tremendous amount of shrooms in his life. And apparently he was doing mushrooms one time and he believes mushrooms to be the voice of God. I hope I'm not like paraphrasing him there. But he said, he asked the mushrooms, he was talking to them. He was like, hello, mushroom, please show me your true nature. And then the mushrooms went and everything just turned to pure white. And then he was just there like this, staring at the pure white. So do with that what you will.
I've heard many stories like this, But see, at the same time, you hear really fucked up stuff off them. Terence McKenna said he asked the mushroom, how do we solve the social problems? There's some type of social problem. And the mushroom said that essentially that every woman should have only one child. And it's like reduce the fertility rate down to 500 million people. And like there's this big weird thing now where people are like saying that's part of the whole big crazy government conspiracy and all that. And so you're like, wait, was the mushroom telling Terrence? But then some people are saying Terrence is in the CIA and shit like that. So I don't fucking know. See, this is the problem, is this mind altering stuff had a lot of people in the game who, like, this came up during the 60s. That was a very, very, very important time for demoralizing the American state. That was when Yuri Bezmenov was saying that's when they got everybody taking drugs, got everybody into sex, and then completely anti-Christianized everybody. That completely softened everybody up, and it was preparing them for a Soviet takeover. That was a big, big, big part of what was going on at that part of history. So all of our modern culture, such as taking drugs and like casual hookup culture and all that, is rooted back in a political attempt at a takeover. And that's something you have to really contextualize, in that a lot of this stuff is sold to you. It's got a mythology around it that was actually had the intention to take advantage of you, the same way as that utopianism was a part of Marx trying to take advantage of you. So I don't know where to put all that stuff in, like, because as I said, I know loads of people who get into drugs and all that stuff, and I've done them myself, and I was part of this, and you just don't see any real life improvement until you do basic stuff like learn how to get strong, learn how to make money, learn how to present yourself, learn how to dress. It's like I wouldn't put like take a shitload of drugs as something that completely will change your life long term. And for the positive, like discipline will do more for you than a high dose of LSD, and that's a very fucking crazy idea to get down to. And personal development, like this is again shadow work. I found far more useful. Talking to girls, I found far more life changing than any of that shit where I like asked a voice in my head to turn the world white and all that stuff. So I like to be realistic in that type of way. Like I don't like promoting it as some type of be all end all solution, or even like it's super magic. Like it's something that you'll never get anywhere else, and it's like living a dream, but it's not. I thought that it was doing something special, but it's not. It's almost like it's a trip. It's like going traveling. You come back home and the bills still come in the door. So there's no escaping your life, and you're not going to escape them in drugs either. So so like such a proof.
Or the exact same thing with the occult. Like 100%. I've had experiences of people in the occult, and then they get absolutely obsessed with it, and they're like, the answers that I am looking for are hidden in the works of Aleister Crowley. It's like, no, please no, because it never ends. Have you ever heard a happy ending where it's like he became an occultist and lived happily ever after? No, wrong. Or like he took mushrooms and lived happily ever after? No. They're a curious phenomenon, but they will not solve your problems. Now, I'm what, like 22 years old. I have no idea, but it's like you never see that happening ever. Not if you want to live as part of civilization, anyway.
Yeah, and see, this is it. There could be a type of person, like someone who's very special, shamanically orientated, that it's just their destiny to do this stuff. It's probably not you, though. That's the thing you got to understand. Like, you're probably better off going the old wife and children thing. And it's true, man. It's like people will be like, oh, I want to be a rock star. So they're like, I'm going to take a shitload of cocaine when I'm young. And then they never make it. They end up a drug addict. Like, and it's just like, it's not always going to be you. I'm going to screen share something here to also give you a little bit of a black pill on the occult. And you'll love this. This is from around about the same time as we had Project MK Ultras, the 60s, and also around about the same time as we had all the LSD and all that stuff. There's a big theory, and I know you love theories, that the American state was infiltrated in the 50s. There was this thing called McCarthyism, where it seemed like a load of communists got into the American state. There was even a communist party over there. And a lot of people said it was all bullshit. But nowadays, people are finding evidence that McCarthy was right. There was a shitload of them going on. And then the decade after that, we had the sexual revolution, destruction of Christianity. Films started showing divorce a lot more, and the abundance of LSD, Timothy Leary, all of that stuff that premised modern culture. Consumerism ramped up. The Summer of Love, and this is a nice little project that you find in there as well. Project MK often was a covered Department of Defense program developed in conjunction with the CIA, 1964. Now I'm going to read just straight to the end, all right? As part of the operation, often, Dr. Goblet and other CIA employees visited with recruited fortune tellers, palm readers, clairvoyants, astrologists, mediums, psychics, specialists in demonology, witches, warlocks, Satanists, and other occult practitioners, and more. So I've always found that very interesting. Went further than just mind control. It branched out into the world of black magic.
Wait. Palm readers.
Well, listen, this is what they're trying to do. Dr. Sidney Gobletta was trying to explore the world of black magic and harness the forces of darkness and challenge the concept that the inner reaches of the mind are beyond reach. What the fuck? But this is what was going on. So like all that shit with Crowley and all that stuff, like it's all the government were all into it. It was all part of this movement, and it's sold as this like cool thing you can get into, but I think you just need to know context a little bit as well, man. There's some weird stuff going on there. Like it's, as I said, these things are a part of a cultural subversion program, and then you just jumping into them, I'm just like, oh my god. And this ties into what we're talking about here. Like that's all Antichrist level shit right there, if you ask me. So
I also agree. I agree. You always end up making these things absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, man. Yeah, the fucking government were researching black magic to try control our minds. There you go, guys. There you fucking go.
All that stuff goes back really far in government. You mentioned John Dee. I think you mentioned him earlier. It was like he was the BFF of Queen Elizabeth. He was like her advisor, and many times he secretly ruled the government, more or less. It's like that stuff's 400 years old. So it goes really, really deep. A lot of the old Christians were occult practitioners, and they were into stuff like Hermeticism and the mathematics of it. It all goes back, and it's all creepy. It's like what was it? They're even in the Bible, and this blew my mind as well. It's like when you talk about the three wise men. Like the three wise men weren't just wise boyos coming over from the east following the stars. They were magicians, and not like a magician from Dungeons and Dragons where he's casting infernos all over the place. Like occult magician type characters, and they came and gifted Jesus with things. It's like this stuff is at the heart of our culture as well. So just as we've thrown out religion as silly, we've also thrown out occultism as silly. But if you think that religion's not silly after stuff like Carl Jung, then maybe the occult's not so silly either. And maybe you shouldn't engage with it or talk to the mushrooms.
Yeah, man. Like the whole occult thing ties in with this idea of the third temple as well. Like like this is something you'll find that there's Judaism is wrapped up in the occult quite a lot. Because when I studied Aleister Crowley, I was huge into this stuff. You study Aleister Crowley, and you get in touch with the Kabbalah. He uses the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, fundamentally. It is a doctrine of how it's essentially the chakras. It's like a yoga for the Middle East of sorts. And then Babylon, they call it Babylonian black magic. When you study the Kabbalah and all that, it's bringing you back to Babylon and what the Jews claim. It claims this is what they learned in Babylon. Astrology is wrapped up in it. It's all this stuff. Tarot. It's all wrapped up in these ideas of because the Babylonians is where astrology comes from, and it's all wrapped up in the ideas of the satanic worship of super states of some sort. There's this weird phenomenon where big empires get wrapped up with this stuff for some reason. It seems like it's a tool of power, and there's a lot of really, really weird stuff about this, man. Because as I said, that second temple was related to. That second temple was all wrapped. The third temple is I think the Kabbalah or something to do with the occult is all directed towards rituals for the third temple. Like it's something. It's bringing your consciousness back to that place. It seems like it all wraps itself around there of some sort. And there's some really, really, really funky, weird stuff. I don't think I'll screen share this. So maybe I'll leave it for another time. I'll leave that for another time. Let's find more questions, then we bounce. Steps on how to make an accurate prediction. Make an extremely general theological statement. Wait for some specific blah, 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 blah. Claim said event was, I think that's sarcasm. Not Judeo-Christian. Don't say that, people are saying.
Oh, yeah. Judeo-Christian is a myth. It's because the two of them were identical up to a certain point. Yes, but I don't know what to call it before Christianity and Judaism split. Is there a word for that? I don't know.
Should I believe in Jesus, James? Matthew.
Go. You can find out that answer for yourself.
Look, like, man, if I was to be honest, I was very anti-Christian growing up. I read a lot of Nietzsche. Like you are as a millennial at this age. You're like, oh, it's all gay, lies, bullshit. Like it's clearly it's a force of ignorance. Like, and then I'm like, all right, take a load of LSD and get into the occult. Like that's my solution to that problem. And but I noticed that one time I sat down with my girlfriend, and I was big into tarot and all that shit, and I was doing all that weird stuff, and I was reading Jung at this point. And luckily, there was a side of me that was very based because I read the Western canon, so I didn't just become a full-on like satanic liberal degenerate that like literally injected soy up my face or something like that. But I watched Passion of the Christ, and it doesn't matter what you believe about Christianity. I resonated with Jesus in that. Like I watched what happened to him, and I could see it, my emotions went off. I was like, he's a hero. Like I could see the hero energy. Like I was just watching that scene where he was getting whipped and chunks of his flesh are getting ripped off. And he was broken down onto his knees, and they bet him. They're hitting his legs. They're like, fall. They made him fall. And he's down there and he's bleeding. He's broken. And he just gets back up again, And it doesn't matter what you say. That's such a human thing. And that's what that story is actually about, is that he was a man who knew he was the truth, and he was like, you can do whatever, you can tear my body to pieces, you will not break me, you will not, because you cannot touch the inside of my mind, you will not get my soul, because you cannot access that in the physical world, you have no authority over me. It's like what he said to Pontius Pilate, you have no authority over me. You are not God. You have no power over me, because you don't even play this game on the same level as I am. I'm in the metaphysical sphere. I believe in myself. It's psychological. It's astral. It's whatever. It's something else. And you can just break all my bones if you want, but you'll never break my soul. It's that idea. And that's what he represents. And if you want to get into all the crazy religious stuff, you can, like this is what we're doing here. But fundamentally, I always go back to this, is that man, he existed, and whatever he stood for, when I see it, I recognize it as warrior energy. And I'm like, I don't really think there's any reason not to believe in that, because he's legit. Like, this is the reason why he built Europe, is because he's legitimately like the true soul of a strong person. He's got a strong soul, and he gets the psychological reasons why he makes you strong. So I think there's every reason to believe in that man. And I don't think it's complicated either. I don't like overcomplicating things. I do not think it's complicated with Jesus. He was a fucking G, only he spelt his name with J.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna make this a little bit more individual. So whoever asked that question, I'm talking directly to you right now. So I didn't tell you to go and turn to Jesus for a specific reason, and it's not something you can just decide one day, because you might be listening to this, or you might be listening to Christian things and think to yourself like, yeah, Jesus was a cool guy, I believe in Jesus, I'm going to turn to Jesus. But just as Jesus was standing there in front of Pontius Pilate and he was whipped and torn to pieces and put up on the cross, you will also go through similar things psychologically in your life. We all do. And you need to make a decision whether or not to hold on to the will of God or to let it go. Do you continue to believe in Jesus when things get tougher, or when things get easier and there's no reason to hold on to it? I would encourage you to read the story in the book of Daniel about the fourth man in the fire. It's a prototype of the Christ story. And there were three men, and the King Nebuchadnezzar said, bend down before the golden idol. And they were like, no, we're not doing it. So he threw them into the fire and burned them up. But the reason why they actually survived this, and the reason why they did survive, they didn't burn up, was because they held on to the will of God. And then apparently Christ was there standing with them, protecting them. So you can say to yourself, yeah, I believe in Christ. It's like, do you really believe in Christ? And that's what the story really means. It's not a statement of fact that you can say with your mouth. It's a statement of will that you hold on to no matter what.
Yes. 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 Something I actually wanted to mention earlier, because a lot of people in the chat are talking about the temple again and Kabbalah. They fucking love this stuff. I'm telling you, these are all antichrists here. And something I heard of E. Michael Jones, he said that, and this is where it becomes even more interesting, is that now he was saying this, I'll have to look up the resource for another time, but he was saying that the Jews had an opportunity with the Romans to rebuild the temple. They found a Roman emperor who sympathized with them and who was preparing to rebuild the temple, and he had everything. Like, everybody was looking and they were saying, okay, cool, if the Jews rebuild this temple, it's proof that Jesus was a fraud. Okay, so that was the big deal. And they all went down and they got the space. it was all funded, it was all good to go, and they started work, and then suddenly everybody who's working on the temple was consumed in a giant fire that came out of the floor on the actual site where it happened, and then that just destroyed the whole project. And then everybody was suddenly in shock and being like, "Oh my god, holy shit, this is like legitimately Jesus was the real deal. God is like punished him again for doing that." And everybody was like, "Oh God, okay, cool, sweet. So I think we're gonna go Christianity of some sort." And I think I'm gonna have to look up that story, but I find that interesting if that happened, because that just makes things funky and mystical in a way that you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, what happens when you go against the will of God?
That's it. It's like, is that validating that will of God idea? It's like, what? Go look up occult science on YouTube. There's a guy that does a long ass series on occult science. It's pretty nutty. Yeah, man. Yeah, the occult, man. I got a Crowley thing from my mushroom trip. I came back with "Love is the Law," and it happened to be a Crowley quote. Whoa, that's interesting. The highest registers of Kabbalah is you literally embody Adam in the Garden of Eden, and you use names to speak things from potential to actuality. Yeah, it's magic, man.
You become God. You know, that's yeah.
Yep, it's magic, man. That sounds like what Alex Jones is on about. Fucking is, man. Give you an idea of what these fucks are up to. Blavatsky was nutty as Crowley. Yeah, she was nutty. I've read Crowley, man. I've been into him. Yeah, Joseph Smith was a colorful history. I read Crowley for sure. So you're talking to each other. You don't even fucking like me anymore. What the fuck is this? Aware cross. Yes. No more questions, though. It seems just the boyos are just like spiraled now onto the occult.
Leave to it.
The high registers of the Buddhist wheel. Okay, any last questions? We're gonna close this up there soon. Yes. Sorry, Matthew Mendoza. James, have you looked into Mormonism?
Yeah, a little bit. There's a I don't know how you can find this. So there's a bloke on Twitter called Logo Centrifugal, and I did a podcast with him because he's Mormon by heritage, I'd say. I think his parents are Mormon or something like that. He's from Utah, and he was telling me about Mormonism, and it's absolutely fascinating. Like, you can't just take someone like Joseph Smith and throw him away either, because it's what he went and he found these golden tablets, and then he created this apparently a cult. But people actually followed him. And if you look into the verification of the golden tablets, loads of people independently said that they saw the golden tablets. It's like, what the hell is that? But I want to get into Mormonism, not get into it. I want to look into it more, because what we discussed on that podcast was absolutely fascinating. Because the whole mission of Mormonism is you end up becoming a god itself. So it's not you stop being subservient to God and you become a god. So it's almost like a twist on the individuation process. You don't become one with God, you become a god. So I don't know. I've tried to look up what Jung thinks about Mormonism, because that's usually what I like to do. It's like, what other people that I respect think about it? And he hasn't really talked about it. So if you have any good resources on getting into Mormonism, looking into it, I'd appreciate that.
I think Bobby Joe actually sent me some articles before, because he asked me here, did you read those articles about Mormonism? I believe I believe I did read them, but I actually forget, my man. I think it was something that someone was talking about Jungian psychology and Mormonism, because it was almost like Mormonism takes Christianity and makes it in some way a way of self-development up to a godlike status. But I think I'm mixing them up with the Amish in my head or something like that. Are the Mormons the guys who throw away all modern technology, or are they something different?
No. The Amish are the ones who live literally by all of Moses' commandments, even down to the point where they can't have corners on their hair for whatever reason, and they breed in with each other to preserve bloodlines and other strange practices. No, the Mormons were the way the Mormons actually see Joseph Smith is like a prophet on the same level as Moses or Jesus, and he extended the philosophy by saying, yeah, eventually you will go and become a god, and yeah, I haven't looked into it but it seems sound. Like, I don't think it was like Scientology. It's clearly corrupt and satanic and evil. I don't think Mormonism is a similar thing, even though I think lots of us sort of see it as in that kind of weird way.
Bobby Joe, yeah, I did read them. I remember they're about Jung, so they came into mind. But actually, I forget the content, man. If you could link them again, my man. Sorry about that. They've flipped out of my mind. I'll even check them out now while James is talking, and we'll do something like that. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Since Christ is the embodiment of pure masculine logos, would the Antichrist be in the embodiment of pure feminine eros? Yes. Christ embodiment of pure masculine logos will. So this is interesting. I find Nietzsche is a form of masculine logos with his Ubermensch. So I don't really know what to make of that. Satan is something. It's almost like Satan is dark logos, and it's what they seem to do is that they coax you into his plan with eros. So he appeals to your emotions, he appeals to your softness, to your eroticism, to your need for sex. Like we'll talk about, like we'll draw up the satanic conspiracy theory here. And yes, pure materialism is a very interesting thing. So it relates to this, the feminine eros. That is actually related to the idea that Mother Earth is the goddess, and there is no God. God is dead, and Satan deceives you away from that. And so the Antichrist is related to this as well. And so that's related to this idea of materialism, which is also related to the idea of science. All of these things are starting to get compounded together. Also related to the idea of technology. And what seems to be happening is, as modern society has been subverted away from Christianity and socially engineered into essentially a cult of consumerism, the fundamental way that we do this is through pure eros. We turn everybody into essentially sex robots, impulse controlled consumers that are super easy to just steer around like automatons. And this is Bernays. Like, you can go read about this. He talks about how the way you control people is by using Freudian psychology. You speak to their animal instincts, and that they will buy as a result of that. So this is where people come up with you see how many women there are in advertising and all that stuff. And so this is turning people into more eros based, almost like babies. And you see the end goal of that now. I think I'd make fun of it in other streams where I say Nicki Minaj is like, oh yeah, up my ass, blah 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 blah. She's like a baby. She's like dribbling, but she's also like highly sexualized as well. And it's almost like anal sexualized too. So there is this clear feminine side to this, where in order to demoralize and soften you and make you easy to subvert, and this is even what they speak about in Yuri Bezmenov speaks about, is you make everything relative. You chew everything up, and you destroy people's souls with femininity, and you attack logos. This is actually what the Frankfurt School said they would do. They would attack the phal logocentric nature of Western civilization. So yes. That's absolutely what seems to be going on. But it seems like that's only a strategy on the outside. But when the point comes for shall we say Satan to tighten his grip, what happens then is you get a dark version of the masculine comes in, and it's usually a brutal dictatorship that is very anti-logos, anti-eros. It's just completely turns you into a slave, and suddenly you don't get to experience your emotions at all anymore. So they soften you up, and then they flip back and smash you into their plan. And then that's what happened in communism. That's what happened in Stalinism. Stalinism was very restrictive. It wasn't just some type of sex cult. You were just a fucking slave. Modern society, like, if we were to worry about what might be happening, it's like maybe they're softening everybody up and preparing to have this big takeover at some point, and they're just waiting for the perfect time. And that would be the coming of the rootless Antichrist. Like, that's how I imagine it would be. It would be the coming of the rootless Antichrist, and he would be a dark logos. He would be anti-truth. He would be violent, brutal, authoritarian masculinity, and those killing all of God's logos in some sort. And I'm not sure if that's feminine, but then again, that is a manifestation of the feminine, because it's like it's the ultimate beast in Mother Nature. And it's like a conspiracy between Mother Nature and her deceptive qualities and this dark, horrible beast that will be coming as well. So I don't know, man. I don't know. That would be my spin on that. I wouldn't say pure eros though. I imagine it as it's almost like a dark logos as opposed to a pure eros. But there's a big eros part of it.
Yeah, I would say I agree with all of that. Well, I'll just bolster it with one small comment. We were actually discussing this in the Discord the other day, with a real life woman who came into a Discord, which is rare for Discord. It's a Patreon perk down below. But I was trying to think of eros as feminine equals women, because then you're in a really weird, maybe the least politically correct place you could possibly be, which is like men equals logos equals order equals good. And then women equals eros equals feminine equals anti-logos equals bad. So it's very easy to so women, feminine, bad. I think if you're gonna construe the Antichrist as anti-logos, which you can, and if you're gonna construe that as eros, which you can, then I would say have eros more in the archetypal domain. So say eros is chaos. So that's how you would conceptualize it. Then you fall into Peterson's frame, I suppose. So it's like, yes, I agree, but it's more feminine in an archetypal sense rather than women.
Yes. Do you think, how big is your home, Stefan? Fucking Pablo, you're always asking about me. It's not too big. It's decent size though. Like it's a lovely Georgian house, and so I enjoy living there. It's a really lovely spot. Dublin's full of these things. They're class, left over from a golden age in Dublin City. So it's a lovely spot, lovely high walls, big windows, all that crack. Bit cold in the winter is the only thing. You fucking ask about
what color is your carpet, Stefan?
It's green, white, and orange, with the orange and then like a burnt British flag. And so yeah, it's just made up of that stuff. Arza, hello. Yeah, we haven't seen them, Bobby. Did you drop them in the chat, or what's the crack? You and Emo.
Yes.
How big is your home? Now I'm reading that again. There was a question here somewhere. Where is it gone?
How big is your bathroom?
Fuck off, James. Send him, yeah. How big is your home? I just keep reading that over and again. Oh, there you go. Do you think the self-individuation process is meant to be taken alone?
The individuation process alone?
Yes, is the self-individuation process meant to be taken alone? Oh, chat in Discord. Okay, I'll check Discord, dude. Yeah. Ish
alone. So when you for example encounter the shadow, it's almost always in relation to another person. So that's sort of a cheat answer. It's like, yes, it's a process that you go through alone. You can't hold hands with somebody else and go, we're going to go individuate together. It's like you will experience shadow projections onto other people and anima or animus projections onto other people. So it's you in relation to the entire world.
I got this article by Bobby Joe there, so I'm going to check it out very quickly, and then I'll read it afterwards. Okay, no, it's too long. The individuation process as, where am I gone? The individuation.
You were telling us about the size of your house.
Yeah. I said, yeah, fuck. You fucking bastard, James. Do you think the self-individuation process is meant to be taken alone? I think someone answered this. Pluto stop. Oh no, you answered it yourself. Progressing with others seems more permanent. Part of the individuation process would be learning how to be with people. So I don't think it is supposed to be taken alone. But fundamentally, like, it's quite an esoteric idea, individuation. If you can kind of attach too much to the concept of like, what is it? What is going on? What do I do? Whereas I think the best way to orientate yourself to things like this is to just simply say, how do I move forward? What's the next step? How do I overcome my emotional blocks? So I've always looked at it that way. Like, what's holding me back? Like, sometimes you'll have anxiety, a really mild version of anxiety that's dictating all your decisions. You might not have enough money. And so you're like, okay, and this uncertainty is hanging over me. So it's like, or maybe my next big stop is to solve that problem. How do I make something happen in terms of my cash? Or maybe you're lonely. And so it's like, maybe your next big step is to make some friends. Or maybe you're weak. Your next big step is to make some get juicy and all that. And these basic things will carry you along that way. And then at some point you might be dealing with the profound desert of nihilism. And so like nothing you can do, like you're losing. It's almost like life is going dry, turning to ash in your mouth. And so your next big step might be to sit down and truly contemplate the very deep depths of nihilism of some sort. Then after that, you might isolate yourself to do that job. And then after that, it might be, okay, I need to start, like, you know, fighting for something. And then you get big into politics and all that. And then suddenly you find yourself obsessing over politics. And then the next step might be to integrate with your community again. So it's happening separate. But I guess fundamentally these questions happen alone. But you can work with people to do them. Like, people often have stuff like a guide and all that, or mentors and all that. But it does happen alone to a large extent, but it involves people. Jesus Lord, these things are flying in fast. What Irishman through history do you look up to, Stefan? Not James. See that, James? See the way they're asking me the questions?
Do you know what my answer is, though?
No,
my father, because he was Irish.
I was trying to mute you there, but you got it out. What Irishman through history do you look up to, Stefan? So I like Michael Collins, but I need to research him more to know exactly what he did, because I also think I like Dev a bit, but a lot of people hate Dev, so I have to be careful about that. I've always liked that part of history. I look up to people like Joyce and Yeats and all that. I think they're very, very excellent artists. So I've always been big fans of that. And then before that, I don't really know that many historical figures. I would be rooted firmly in that part of history, is the liberation thing. But I don't know Mad Sweeney. I wouldn't see that much either. No, James, can you see the chat? Someone's asking. But I'd look a lot at mythology. Like, I'm a big fan of Irish mythology, so I'd be looking into like Cuchulainn and Fionn and the Fianna and all that stuff. But in terms of Irishmen, political figures, like I don't know any great warlords that came out of Ireland and all that. Like, we seem to have this sort of artist style to ourselves. So I'd look at like Yeats and all those dudes. I really think they're cool. Does Jung talk about specific people who had completed the individuation process or something? I'll check out Wolftone, actually. I've heard of him. Jimmy Boyle.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat because Babby Joe asked. There is evidence Christ was married. He's saying as well. Yes, there is. The Talbot tomb, something like that. Where yes, there is. If you look up that, that's very, very interesting.
God was also married, I would posit. You can't be God without Logos and Eros, which requires woman. What? A question about game, that's gas. All right, we'll get into that now in a sec. Does Jung talk about specific people who have completed the individuation process or something? I'm actually not too sure. I imagine people like Buddha are framed as that type of character. Like, it's almost like if you do the whole individuation thing to the end game, something really weird happens where you just get lifted out of reality by whatever forces it is, and that's just a crazy idea to get your head around, that you can like manage your way all the way up into a sort of transcendence, like it's a literal real thing, which makes it like a video game, which is nuts. And then yes, James is saying, I'm pretty sure he says it never completes. I think that could be true as well. Yeah, so like Irish warlords in the Viking Age, but a lot of those were Vikings. And there was like the O'Neills, they're a very famous dynasty. But they're all wrapped up in the mythology, and then like there's stories of people like Brian Boru who fought against the Vikings, and that's all class. But then you have like fucking dickheads like Strongbow and all that shit. So yeah.
Quick one to Babby Joe. You've actually sent me those two articles before. I can see in the chat. They're currently sitting in my library to read. I've imported them into my library on my Linux machine. So yes, haven't forgotten about them, of course, but we'll definitely check those out.
How class is your pickup game? Is that beast? It's asking about my home and then my pickup game. I wouldn't say I'm like world class or anything like that. I can definitely go up and talk to a girl, strike up a conversation, and have a good time. I wouldn't be no like high level super skilled expert though, or any of that stuff, but I most certainly feel comfortable, and I have the ability to go up and present myself to a woman, most certainly. But how class it is, I'm not sure I could quite quantify. But hey, if we see each other someday, maybe we can go out and we can go chat to a few girls, see what happens.
And then bring him back to your beautiful house, which is why he was asking. Because is it a nice house to bring women to, or is it just an absolute slum?
It's actually gorgeous. Like, it's got its big double bed, and it's like look, now you're getting fucking information. I just take them into bushes and shit.
Jesus fucking Lord.
Do you know the Causeway as well? I've never tasted that. It's rare now. Never tasted that. Blah blah blah. Virgin Wham and the best one. I'm pretty sure he says it's never complete. Man, Sweeney, how class your pickup game. Plenty of Irish warlords, and then it's just talk about this again. So, any last questions? And we're gonna bounce. I think we've got to bounce, people. I think we've got to bounce. We're at 120 minutes. No, I think we're all good. All right, people, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you very much for your time. This has been Antichrist Part 2, and next week we will continue again. Thank you very much. Boyo, over and out. Jimmy Boyo.
Goodbye.